All right, so I saw a really interesting clip on Twitter that I really wanted to talk about. Anytime that I get the chance to talk on like Call of Duty history, where we have to go back a few years, I instantly get really excited about it. And this clip that I'm talking about, the one that I'm referencing, was from the Courage and Nade Shot show. I'll have this exact portion of that podcast that I am reacting to, the one that I first saw. I'll have that link down in the description. And essentially, it was Nade Shot opening up about his retirement from competitive Call of Duty, and also the toll that his mental health took by being on that team.
So I quit because of many different reasons. I'll just run down them. One, the team that I was on with Formal, Crimsix, and Scump, we won 3 majors in a row before we lost champs. And at that time, the fact that we lost champs, it felt like the first 3 championships we won together didn't matter. Like, you didn't win the big one, so nobody's going to remember the first 3, and that history has proven that. You know, like, people talk about the OpTic Dynasty with Karma on the team, and I guess, you know, selfishly, it kind of makes me upset. What about the first 3 majors of the goddamn year that we won? Like, what happened to that? But at that point, I was on a team that was so talented, there was nowhere else for me to go. Like, when you have Scump, Formal, and Crimsix on the team, their expectation at that point, since we won 3 tournaments, we should be winning every tournament that we play in. And I was, you know, from a stats perspective, the weakest on the team. And I was always a scapegoat. You know, when you have all the attention and you are the most popular team, there's good and bad that come with that. And I was just so tired of people, if we lost the map, it was just nade shot, nade shot, nade shot. Yeah, there was just a lot of pressure to be in the position I was in, and I couldn't mentally handle it anymore.
So I really wanted to talk about his comments when it came down to that video and really start to look at the OpTic Dynasty just a tad different. Like, I'm not trying to rewrite history, but I want to emphasize things that I feel like are not highlighted the way that they should. So I will start this off by essentially saying that OpTic Dynasty, when you think about that team, it does feel like, and I agree with Nate on this, it does feel like we really only remember Karma being with the other 3, right? Karma, Scump, Formal, Crimsix. We do forget about the first 5 events, about the first 3 event wins that team did have with Nadeshot on the roster. And I feel like that's very important to reference, because you could say, Landon, but yes, the OpTic Dynasty went on to play for multiple seasons. And I 100% agree with that, right? There is no doubt that, like, I think he was only a part of like 3 out of the 18 wins that the OpTic Dynasty would go on to have. However, I feel like we don't really remember or highlight whenever that team was formed, when that team originated together, how big of a piece that Nadeshot played in all of that happening. It's like I said, I honestly, I find myself guilty of the same thing. I feel like when I think of the OpTic Dynasty, like, Nade doesn't even pop into my mind. And a lot of it, like I said, I believe has to do with the amount of events, the amount of things that took place after Nade did leave. And I also feel like when Nade did leave that team, it's almost a service to what he was able to do that allowed for it to be such a quick transition that also should give him credit for that. So what I want to do is just briefly run down the events that he played for the OpTic Dynasty team. So we come into Advanced Warfare, right? It's a huge deal. I'd recently started my Twitter during this time, so it was a really big deal for me. Right? The massive announcement. Formal and Crimsix are joining Nade and Scump on OpTic Gaming heading into Advanced Warfare. This was one of the scariest looking lineups. We thought, oh my gosh, this could be, you know, the new power team, possibly. And little did we know what it would eventually turn into. Right, UMG Columbus 2014, Nade's first event with this OpTic Dynasty team. Obviously, they weren't considered a dynasty even close to yet. It's unfortunate, right? They lose versus Aches. He's got the injury to his hand. They lose to him and FaZe in the final. Aches gets his revenge. One of the sweetest victories of his career that he's talked about was being able to beat Crimsix. And honestly, considering that OpTic decided to pick up everybody but him, right? Like, they picked up Teep. A lot of people forget that. They picked up Teep. They picked up Karma onto the Nation roster, and they added Crim to the main lineup. So they basically absorbed everybody on Complexity that would later turn into Evil Geniuses, except for Eggs. And he would go on to beat them at their very first event together. They go into Orlando. They manage to finally get that monkey off their back. It's the first win for this roster. They head into the MLG Pro League Season 1, which was really fun to look back at because I actually forgot how many matches that used to be played during that time. And just one season, I think there was multiple seasons in Advanced Warfare. And just this, particular portion of the year, OpTic finished with a 38-6 overall record, which is crazy how many series we played. It's also crazy the result that they had. 38-6, unbelievably impressive. Number 1 seed heading into playoffs. They end up beating Denial in the finals. They go back to back. Clearly the number 1 team at this moment, right? There was no question about it. Without a doubt, the number 1 team. Everybody's performing. We're starting to see, content come from the team. Like, everything is going right for OpTic. And it gets even better because now we're starting to talk about champs, right? We're starting to talk about the big event OpTic could win champs. They head into the North American qualifier, easily sneak through that. 3-0s everywhere, win that event. It's now their 3rd event victory in a row coming in to COD Champs 2015. The number 1 team. Most, if not everybody, expects them to win it. Granted, there are a few other rosters that are starting to get better. And after a solid looking start in the pool play, OpTic gets an unfortunate first round seed. They play against Denial, a team that they have beaten in the last 2 events, I'm pretty sure. A team that's been very well studied on that roster. They lose to them in round 1. That team, spoilers, would go on to win COD Champs. So you can kind of see the unfortunate results of the fact that they had to play against that team, a roster that they've already played against multiple times, and a roster that was very hot during that time. So that roster gets their revenge. OpTic later goes on to face off against what would be NADE's last series versus FaZe Red versus Aches. They lose that. Not only do they lose that, but they lose it in a 3-0 fashion. They lose the S&D dominantly. They get pummeled when it comes down to the uplink. OpTic is eliminated 7th, and that is it, right? Everybody freaks out. Everybody's like, wait a second. This team was supposed to win the whole thing. And it all comes crashing down, and to no surprise, right, the instant player that every single person looks at is NADE. They look at the KDs and they say, you know what? NADE is the weak link. He starts to feel the pressure of all of that. I think during this time, given the fact that obviously OpTic was looked upon as a team that is expected to win everything now, the fact that they don't, responsibility falls on to him. And so part of 5 events, right? That is NADE's run with the OpTic Dynasty. It starts off a little rough. It then gets very, very good. Right? They look unbelievably dominant for a few months. They go into COD Champs and everybody forgets about it. Right? Why? Because of the big finish where they didn't deliver where everybody expected them to. So again, it's not very long. It's not super memorable, honestly, because of the negative attribute that you have to it as well. Like, a lot of people kind of forget as well, the Black Ops 3 COD Champs. A lot of people forget, what was going on during that time as well because of the unfortunate ending that would later happen the next season where they lost to Aches again, right? Because of how painful the loss ended up being. So, like I said, wasn't there for a long time during the Dynasty. However, what I will say is that he deserves more praise, not just for being a part of the team, not just for being a part of a 3-peat with that lineup, but also because he helped get it off the ground. Like, a lot of people don't realize how crazy roster changes were back then. Like, in my opinion, not only does NADE deserve props for allowing for this team to be the most notable roster at the time, right? Not only does he deserve the props for, being one of the biggest esports players in the world, he not only created the destination or the location that would house the OpTic Dynasty, but he also deserves credit for the players that wanted to be there, for the players that even were there in the first place. Because again, you have to think about this. If that argument that ends up going down in Ghost between NADE and Scump, right? Scump leaves. There was a moment where everybody looked at NADE to give the go-ahead on if Scump can come back or not. If NADE says no, imagine how differently everything is, right? Imagine how differently everything is. The dynasty probably doesn't happen, right? OpTic is probably not nearly as notable or as followed as they are. And who knows what ends up going down? Like Scump goes on to Envy. Maybe the dynasty ends up forming there. I mean, who knows, right? Formal, Crim6, maybe they go on to Envy. And then now we're talking about Team Envy, the boys in blue, for years upon years upon years rather than OpTic. So I think he deserves a lot of credit, not just for the future sake of what happens to OpTic, but also because the dynasty does not happen if NADE is not there. The dynasty does not happen because Scump would not be there, Former would not be there, Krim would not be there, and also his replacement later would not be there either. As I said, Teep and Karma got added to the OpTic Nation team, so it was an easy transition for OpTic to make. So like I said, I think that he deserves a lot of credit for not only being part of the original team, but for also helping get that roster off the ground, for making OpTic the primary destination that could house a lineup like this. Also, he's there and helps allow for this to be the destination, but also for the players who would later come to this team. Because if Scump's not here, I don't think the Formal and Crim6 come either. I really don't. That's just me. I don't think they come here if Scump is not already here. So Scump ends up being allowed to join the team. And honestly, I think most people would have made that same decision, but you still have to give props where it's due, considering how, much drama existed between the both of them. And then for the later success that they would have. And honestly, too, because of what NADE did in his role for this team, it did allow for Karma to come in and essentially have to play the role that he did. Like he wasn't coming into this team, despite for most of every roster being the go-to player, right? Complexity, for God's sake, added him to the lineup to be their star, right? One of the greatest dynasties of all time, Complexity / EG, added Karma to do whatever he wanted. And now he's coming into the OpTic Dynasty and filling a role that NADE ran, and it allowed for things to kind of start a little bit more seamlessly. I would say if this roster formed with the original 4 players, I don't think that it gets off the ground and it lasts for more than a season. I don't. I really don't. I think that it had to be a player who was willing to be unselfish, and you can, like I said, it's understandable. It's almost like, yeah, but he had to be unselfish given the talent that he was around. But again, you have to give props where it's due. And so I feel like if NADE does not solidify that role, make it so apparent that Karma's now coming into this team not to be a slayer, but to fill the same role that NADE did, I don't think it ends up working. I feel like NADE really is the key to the OpTic Dynasty getting off and doing what it would later do. Now, again, I'm not saying that NADESHOT should have every single title that team ended up accruing over those few years. The World Championship, should he deserve to have a ring? No, obviously not. But again, I'm hitting on this so hard because I feel like we've forgotten the formation and the groundwork that was laid in order for the OpTic Dynasty to take place, first off, essentially. And I feel like he always did get a bad rap as well. Like, it kind of is a shame because I feel like NADE would have played a few more years. Again, we all know, not somebody who was going to come in and put up 1.3s, 1.2s, 1.1 KDs. But I feel like he did have enough to be, a veteran leader, to kind of be, guys that we've seen progressively go throughout their career and be an objective-minded player, to be somebody who plays smart versus somebody who's going to be up in your face dropping numbers over and over again. And one thing that I really want to do is during that time, COD fans were very naive, and we still are to this very day, because of this little stat that we have that's called the KD, right? The KD indicates if you are good or if you are bad. And I'll be honest, as a commentator, as somebody who has followed this game for over a decade, I lazily often will look at KD as a barometer for how well a player is playing. Now, is that the indicator sometimes? Yes. We all need to be aware of that. Is a KD sometimes a barometer for how a player is playing? Absolutely. Because the overall objective of the game is to eliminate the other team. That's what you have to do, right? If you're not eliminating the other team, then it then puts pressure on your teammates to pick up the kills, that of which you cannot find. Is it the foundation? Yes. But there is so many other things that you do have to consider, right? And I feel like this is an age-old conversation. So what I really wanted to do was to show you two different stat lines, right? Two different stat lines. I'm not going to show you the headings or for where these events were, but I'm going to show you these two different stat lines. And I find these very intriguing because I had to do a little bit of research to find these. So on the left, you see a 1.3, a 1.14, a 1.03, and a 0.96. On the other side, honestly, basically the same KDs, right? I mean, almost identical. This is a 1.31, a 1.13, a 1.02, and a 0.99. Basically the exact same stats. And the interesting part is that if you look at the left versus the right, on the left side, this is the COD Champs 2015, where OpTic finished top 7 that everybody said, you know what? Nade can't be on this team, right? Does not deserve to be on this team. You know, with all the hype and, you know, with all the things, we expected this team to win the entire event. Like, look at the stats. Nade, the only player below this is unacceptable, right? That is the COD Champs 2015 overall stats, the overall KDs for OpTic Gaming. The stats on the right, which are exactly identical, is the Vanguard Major 1 Championship that OpTic Texas won this last season. And that is why I want to bring up KD so often, because it is not about KD. It's not about KD. Like, these KDs are identical, yet it is a top 7 finish and it's a first place finish. I don't like when we evaluate KDs as much as we have. And that's personally something that I really want to try to stray away from more as seasons progress. And I think as fans that we should, as time, maybe from when it comes down to stats, when it comes down to multiple things, be aware of KDs, because it's overall going to be the barometer that we said. There's no way that you can't do it, right? It's been ingrained in Call of Duty since the game came out. KD, what's your KD? How good are you? What's your KD? I get it. But from competitive COD fans' perspectives, we need to be aware of the fact that stats do not tell the whole story. And I do feel like the reason for why we can look at, you know, when it comes down to these stats, the left versus the right, and say the left is horrible and the right is great, also has to do as well with the presence of pressure that was caused by a multitude of different reasons, right? When we talk about NADESHOT'S run on OpTic Gaming, and I'll close it out here. The reason for why I feel like when we talk about those stats, you know, the comparisons of each other, the reason why Nade was held under such a spotlight for that team was for a few different reasons. Number one, OpTic was finally looked upon as a team that was expected to win, right? We're bringing in Crim6, we're bringing in Formal, two of the hottest players in Ghost. Crim considered probably the best player of that game, if not one of the best. Formal, who is this guy coming from Halo? He's risen up the ranks, looks amazing. Bringing in these two players alongside of Scump, and we're going to have Nade on the team as well. OpTic was finally looked upon as a team that was actually expected to win. So, again, they were already expected to win, but now they actually had the players. Now they actually had, there was no excuses at this point. If you were losing, you're losing because you're not doing the right things. It's not because you don't have enough talent. Also, right, the reason why the spotlight was directed upon Nade is also because he had the biggest spotlight of any player, right? So he is instantly going to be looked upon as the guy for this team, the representative, the ambassador for OpTic Gaming. Because if OpTic is not succeeding, we're going to look at Nade. If OpTic is succeeding, we're going to look at basically everybody, but Nade a little bit there too. So not only was the team expected to win, Nade, the most popular player in the game, is going to be looked upon. He's going to be scrutinized, regardless, honestly, if they win or if they lose. And then finally, I think that another big part that had to play in Nade's retirement, the reason why there was so much pressure on him, was also because I believe there was a certain percentage of OpTic fans who were angry at the fact that they felt it was almost like if you're on Scump's side or if you're on Nade's side when that argument happened in Ghost. And so it's like if you were, you know, on Scump's side, you're like, yeah, Nade should be off the team. Like, Scump's clearly playing better. He's the only reason why this team sees success. If you look at KD's, Scump's leading in everything. Why is NADESHOT the one who gets to make the decisions? So there was a lot of fans who felt at the time like NADE nearly screwed all of this up and he might do it again. And so I feel like that is one of the primary reasons for why all of this stuff happened the way that it did. The reason why we looked at a 0.95, a 0.92, a 0.93 and said that is unacceptable. There was no way a team can win like that. And again, it gets back to KD's, right? It gets back to kill death ratio. And it's another conversation that we can have for another day. Because like I said, when it comes into Call of Duty, if a team gets 3-0'd, you're not going to see a situation where somebody has a 1.15 despite losing and everybody else has a 0.82. Like it's not the way that it works. Team success, team failure is going to be around the same. Now you're going to have outliers, obviously. But a majority of the time, that's the way that it works. So again, I also feel like when they did go on a hiatus a little bit, it honestly and somewhat unselfishly allowed for the OpTic story to transition into, okay, now OpTic's got karma. NADE is gone. The retirement, it's also not officially a retirement. It feels like NADE is coming back. And then it started to formulate into the champs run, the champs journey. Can OpTic win champs? To me, one of the greatest storylines in esports history. OpTic Gaming's destination, their final, their constant shortcomings of winning a COD champs ring and then finally being able to do it. So again, does NADE get enough credit for being on the OpTic Dynasty team? I think that in some ways he does get enough credit, and in a lot of ways he does not get enough credit for what he was able to do. For the success that team later would have, I feel like was very, very much laid by him. Some ways in game and a lot of stuff out of game. And that is the conclusion of this video. If you liked it, feel free to leave a like. If you have not done so already, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Quick little teaser for you guys. We have lots and lots of content coming to the channel. I'm very, very excited about it. We've got podcasts that are coming, shows that are coming. During all of this off season, I think we're going to be having multiple uploads per week, multiple shows that you guys can tune into. If you haven't done so already, make sure to check out Under One Roof, sports and esports podcast that I'm currently working on right now with my good friend Kingdom Soldier. For those that have been around during the OG days, you definitely remember that name. But yeah, going to be doing little one-off videos like this every once in a while. Just thought I would, pop on, have a conversation for a little while about this topic. And again, just kind of remind you guys about all the amazing content that is coming to this channel. Like I said, comment down below if you have any thoughts on what we talked about today. And otherwise, I will see you guys very soon for more videos. Pop it up here on the channel. Take it easy, guys, and I'll see you soon.